Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete the fourth of four sessions on the disclosure that is now taking place about the UFO UAP phenomenon. As we begin to put together, after 80 years of secrecy and manipulation, the real facts about what has been taking place in the past and how we can evaluate what we need to know as we move into humanity's ET moment. As we begin, I want to just call to mind a line from George Orwell's 1984, in which he says that in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I think at no time, certainly in my lifetime, has this been more true than our world today. If you remember 1984, there was a ministry of love whose sole purpose was to sow dissension and hate. There was a ministry of truth, whose sole mission was to foment war. There was Newspeak, what came over the government-controlled news channels 24/7, 365, that taught people quite literally in how to engage in what they called doublethink, because thought crime was the most egregious crime, because they understood that how one thinks determines what one says and what one does. So the point of the exercise of mass control was to cultivate doublethink, so that what people knew intuitively to be true, what they knew to be incontrovertible facts, but which were being denied by the ministry of truth or the ministry of love or the ministry of peace, was to hold cognitive dissonance as a normal state. And if you think about what we're all receiving through the media, what we're receiving through social media, what we're engaging in more and more in our world as we've traversed through COVID and Ukraine, and now what's going on in the Middle East, among numerous other examples that one can cite. What we know intuitively to be real is perpetually contradicted by what we're being told is actually going on. And I believe that cognitive dissonance is at the heart of the radically increasing stress that virtually every country in the world is reporting, as people lose their capacity to ground themselves in anything that they can feel to be authentic and to be fundamentally true. One of the things we've committed ourselves from the very beginning at Humanity Rising is to speak the truth insofar as we know it, even though, as most of you know, much of the time we're contradicting what we're being told through the mass media. And as you all know, we've had to navigate very carefully, especially during times of COVID, but also on other occasions, to ensure that we've been able to speak the truth with the kind of nuance that avoids the thought police, as George Orwell referred to them, and thus maintain our capacity day by day to stay on the air. And I would say no issue has been more fraught with cognitive dissonance and manipulation than the history of UFOs and unidentified anomalous phenomena. And so as we begin speaking the truth, we understand that it will come in some ways as a shock to many, but more deeply, it will come as a relief that finally what we're being told is true is actually what we've known all along. And that's why New Paradigm Institute and Ubiquity University are developing the training program that we've been talking about over the last several weeks that we're going to be bringing online next week, that will bring to bear the facts as we know them, and will also bring to bear the awareness as we know it of who these aliens are and how we can communicate with them through mental telepathy, remote viewing, etc. So this is a very exciting moment, but it's truth-telling in its most revolutionary aspect that we're engaging in as we initiate with partners all over the world similarly motivated humanity's ET moment. One of the great truth tellers, as you've all seen over the last 4 days, is Richard Dolan, the preeminent historian on all these matters. So Richard, I want to welcome you back to Humanity Rising, and thank you for your truth-telling this week. It's been profoundly liberating. We've received communications. I've gotten emails from people around the world, deeply grateful for the clarity and I would say the intellectual integrity with which you presented your materials. So thank you so much, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and I appreciate that feedback. I'm very happy to be here. It's been a wonderful 3, now 4 days of lecture on the, as much as we can fit into for the reality and profundity of the UFO UAP subject. I do want to just follow up on one really interesting thing that you were saying, Jim, before I jump in, talking about George Orwell, someone also very close to my heart, George Orwell, and dealing with matters of disclosure and truth-telling in government. And this is a very difficult time for us because we are living in, I would have to say, without a lot of hyperbole, a truly Orwellian time where the propaganda is overt and powerful, the lies are incessant, nonstop, and in which really the working definition of democracy is you must never contradict our ideology or our policies. That's the version of democracy that we are now supposed to adhere to. No disobedience allowed. And we see this more and more. And it is in this kind of an environment that we are talking about a disclosure, an honest, transparent disclosure. And we really have to ask hard questions about whether or not the United States government, and indeed Western governments in general, are even capable of a genuine, honest, transparent disclosure in any capacity. I have my doubts, but it doesn't mean that it will be impossible forever. But it does mean that changes, genuine changes, will come at a radical cost to the power structure as it is. So whether or not it can survive an era of truth and light being poured in on it is a really interesting question, and we will all, we'll either see that happen or we will not see that happen. So that's what I wanted to say on that. Now, let me move on to my subject at hand, which is essentially taking a number of steps back to look at the bigger picture, and in particularly to do our best at understanding who are these other beings, if we're able to get that? Why might they be here? And what can we expect? I'm going to offer my own best thoughts on the subject. I cannot pretend that I've got the full answer any more than you do, but I will share my thoughts and years of looking into this, and you can decide for yourself how useful it is for yourself. So we're going to start.
Richard, somehow you've muted
Yeah,
yourself.
this is weird. You were gone for a
I am
second there.
muted. How long have
There
I
you
been
go. There
muted?
you go.
There you go.
Did I just mute myself?
Just before you screen shared.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have hit the wrong button or the wrong icon.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody. So just starting, I talked a little bit about this, in fact, quite a bit on my first day. Are UFOs ancient? Are they modern? Well, they're both. I came down a bit hard on some of the ancient UFO sightings. I still do. I do think it is imperative for researchers to look at these ancient sightings more objectively than we often have. Having said that, I will always maintain and acknowledge that, yes, there is enough that's interesting to make me think and make many people think that we are very likely been subject to a long-term observation and maybe more. Having said that, I will still say the modern UFO phenomenon is, I believe, qualitatively different in many respects than the ancient phenomenon. I feel this is important to say. I think we're making a kind of a conceptual mistake when we conflate the ancient with the modern in every aspect. There are researchers who do this, and they think it's a good thing. I would disagree with them. I don't know that I'm right, but I think this is what I believe. I do think the UFO phenomenon is mostly modern, just judged by purely observational data. By that, I simply mean the quantity. There's no comparison. Yes, we know much less literacy in ancient times. We know much less ability to record data. Yes, we take all of that into account. Nevertheless, I think that since the 1940s, this phenomenon has been at another level altogether. And, you go back a few decades prior to the 1940s and just ask yourself, why were there not that many UFO sightings in the 1930s or 1920s? There were some, we know retroactively, there were some, but not anywhere close to the same amount. Hey, people were outside looking at the skies in the 1920s, the 19-teens, the 1890s, the 1880s. They were smart. They had a lot of modern tech, and yet we didn't have the kind of massive waves of sightings that we are talking about since the 1940s. And I think the difference is because of us, because of what we have done, and that has garnered the attention that we now are in the midst of. That's my opinion. So another way to look at it, though, is this is a nice image of early society, kind of early medieval, perhaps 13th, 14th century. Those folks are having a lot of fun there. They got food out on the table. They're all having a good time, great conversation. But it's not particularly a modern scenario by our standards by any means. And you'd have to ask yourself, if there was an alien visitation during that time period, what could they do with us? What could we do with them? Why would they be deeply concerned with us at that moment? There's not a whole lot that human society in any part of the world would have been able to do in terms of interacting with an alien presence. Our consciousness, you could say, our technology, our infrastructure was just wasn't there. And so you could easily imagine, I would think, a kind of hands-off observational approach that might have been taken during that period of time. Frankly, our history during that period, I say here, uninteresting. That's not true. It's been very interesting, but there wouldn't have been anything for them to do with us. And I don't think we could have really easily understood what they were up to. Just imagine going back in time and trying to explain to the smartest person in that society that the Earth revolves around the sun, or the size of the Earth, or the age of the Earth, or things about like microbes or anything else. Their heads would have exploded because they just would not have been ready. That's just the reality of it. But now, as we entered the 20th century and beyond, well, it's a different situation entirely, isn't it? Um, and that is because we discovered science. We discovered the keys to the universe, in a sense, how to manipulate, how to understand basic principles, mathematics and in physics. And we use those to our advantage, in the sense of advantage of power, and being able to accomplish things that we want to accomplish. We discovered we're pretty good at manipulating science, aren't we? We've only had really 2 centuries of dedicated use of these tools, and we're creating all kinds of weapons and bombs and computers and everything else. So I think this is a qualitative transformation. We need to keep our eye on that transformation, recognize that this is really, I think, the most significant development on the planet is humanity, the apex predator of the planet, getting the keys to the kingdom during the late 18th and the 19th and 20th centuries and today. We have been in a process of change for a long, long time, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, really. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about this. This is a concept that I've been developing for a number of years. I call it the stages of humanity. What I have here, this is an extremely rough and not even totally accurate chronology. I say that, humanity's been hunting and gathering for 300,000 years. That's only because our species as Homo sapiens is now believed to be around for 300,000 years. But our ancestors before that, Homo erectus and many other types, were also engaged in hunting and gathering for at least 2 million years as hunters. So a long time. And that's how all hominid and human species or human variations operated for the longest period of time, until just about 10,000 years ago. Not that long ago, as you can see on the chart there. Essentially, the blink of an eye, when humans developed enough sophistication and knowledge to be able to develop what we can call sedentary agriculture. That is, you settle in one place and you farm the land. You also domesticate animals. You change those animals genetically, as a matter of fact. And you really, at that point, the human species began its process of a global takeover. I think really in earnest. And that begins stage 2 of our existence, hunting and gathering for the longest period of time. And, humanity still has scattered hunting and gathering groups out there, but they're quite small. Agriculture and farming kind of took over, and that gave us all of the empires and societies, and it gave us literacy, writing, it gave us the wheel, it gave us metallurgy, everything from Babylonians and Egyptians through the Roman Empire and beyond. That was stage 2. And then only recently, a few hundred years ago, that little red sliver on the far right of the bar there, that's the last 300 years on this chart, and that's our era of science and industry. And you can see in the grand scheme of things, it's really quite recent. We often forget this. We tend to forget that, well, we're a scientific species. We've been doing this for a long time. Well, no, 300, 200 years, not really a long time. And so that is our grand transformation. Let me just continue onward here and reshare. I lost my thing there. Here we go. I just want to point out, I think, the grand similarities in across time of these stages. So on the left, I have an illustration of ancient hunter and gatherer type societies, and on the right, we have contemporary or relatively contemporary examples of hunting and gathering. The lifestyle is essentially the same. There are always variations, but it's a style in which you are like in the natural mode. You are one with nature. You manipulate nature, but these types of societies had a fairly low impact on the natural world around them. I think that's an obvious thing. And I would also suggest that if you took one of these people from one of those societies and dropped them into another, there'd be language differences, there'd be differences in maybe in clothing and things like that, but the fundamentals would actually be, I think, quite comprehensible to them. Because that's what they really share, is the big picture. Same with agriculture. On the left, I have an image here of artist rendition of the earliest versions of, cutting down wild cereals and the like. And here you've got an image of French peasants in the 18th, 19th century. Really, the style of living across those many thousands of years is not that different. People on the right have better clothing. They've got some better implements to work with, but it's still working with your hands. You're working with natural products, and you are working with the soil, and you're working with animals. You could take one person, drop them into the other world. There'd be some differences, but fundamentally they would understand it. That's stage two. Stage three, also the same thing. This era of science and industry. On the left is an image of London during the Victorian era. On the image of right is London in the late 20th, early 21st century. Fundamentally the same thing. It's comprehensible. And the reason for that is that these stages are dominated by our technological prowess, our technological capabilities, which then affect social organization and affect things like your cosmology, your belief in the world and universe around you. And you could really say that there is a tremendous amount of commonality that these various stages have. And that is why I group them as I do. But I would argue, this change is a natural thing. It's normal. We have been changing all along. There's nothing unusual about that, except now that because of our technological and scientific background, we are rapidly increasing the rate of change. And this is it's exciting, sometimes is unsettling, but it is also the norm. And it's not anything that we as a species have ever had to deal with before. This is a very new thing. And we need to just stop and think long and hard about this. What does this mean to us psychologically, physiologically, in terms of our future social organization? How will all of these things be affected? Human beings have lived in certain patterns for a long period of time. And, we're not moldable plastic. We are biological organisms with genetics. We do go through changes, but how rapidly can those changes go? And can they accommodate? This is the real question. Can we psychologically and socially accommodate the rapid changes that we are seeing that are forcing dramatically new versions of social organization upon us? That's a question I cannot answer here, but I definitely think we need to ask it. And I do believe now the stages of transformation are increasing in their rapidity. And I do maintain that we are moving to a kind of fourth stage of humanity. We can call it the transhumanist stage. I haven't been able to think of a better term for it. You can call it the 24/7 digital surveillance stage or digital control stage. That's true. You can call it the AI stage. That would be true. You can call it any number of other, maybe the quantum computing stage. Future generations will have a better handle on what characterizes this fundamentally, but we can see that it's a confluence of a variety of technologies that are all coming together at once. Incidentally, that image on the right of your screen is an artist's rendition of potentially future humans. So you can accept that or not as you wish. But certainly we're looking at cybernetic applications to humanity. You've got people already talking about things like BCI, brain-computer interface. Well, that's, really the beginning of cybernetics in the human species itself. Take that, combine it with genetic engineering, designer babies. We hear more and more about that. And we are looking at a very different kind of a future and a different kind of humanity as well. All of this is significant from the standpoint of any visiting extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or whatever we think they are. They see that this leading species of this planet right now is going through an incredibly rapid transformation, by the way, which gives that species collectively far, far, far greater power than it has ever had before. Individually, that might be different. Individually, many people believe that these changes are siphoning off their individual autonomy and power. That may be true. We can discuss that. But as a collective, and it is this that is driving the change. It is as a collective that these changes are making the human race far more, vastly more powerful than it has ever been. Many folks love this transformation. I visited a transhumanist website. I go there every now and then, want to hear what these people have to say. They are, the ultimate scientific utopians, I have to just say. Many of them argue the victory of transhumanism is inevitable. And I'll just read this quote from Typical quote from a transhumanist website: "We will do away with our organic prison." They say this without irony. "And unleash our greatest potential. We will break away from the shackles of aging and limited experience and become the very gods in which we told stories about." And you see the image there of a transhumanist. I mean, it almost looks like an Aryan Nazi image from the 1930s there, if you're familiar with that form of artwork. But he's a transhumanist, and he's holding off the sickle of death at his door. He's saying, "Get out, death." All praise to, never mind, I'm just going to leave that where it is. So, and there's Ray Kurzweil, and I'm going to leave the transhumanist thing in a minute here, but this is I would say, a very utopian vision that these individuals have, the kind of never-ending cycle where greater intelligence creates better technology, the better technology improves the intelligence, and it goes on to this feedback loop ad infinitum, presumably. It's a process that they see as a self-directed evolution, constant improvement of our physical capabilities, our mental capabilities, to stop aging or at least slow it down dramatically, and really become post-biological, or at least combining the biologic with the inorganic, technological. Living as gods. This is the goal. They want to be gods. Human beings have always wanted to live like the gods, and when they get the opportunity, if you're lucky enough to become a pharaoh in ancient Egypt, you can be that god. You give people the opportunity, they'll take it. Transhumanists want to live as gods, and maybe they're willing to say, yeah, everyone can live as gods. Whether that actually will be the case or not, I'm a little skeptical. But anyway, I think that is the idea. So we'll just move on here. You know, we all know this, the whole idea of living forever. We're talking about all the pharmaceuticals, the cloning, the stem cell tech, organic 3D printing, artificial implants, nanotech, redesigning the human genome, etc. Oh, yeah, this one on the top here, consciousness in the cloud. This is the Avatar Project 2045 initiative to transfer human consciousness to non-biological substrate. Just stop and think about that for a minute. Is that possible? Well, they believe it is. Perhaps it is. You have to ask yourself, what vessels, containers can consciousness reside in? We're used to it residing in organic material like our brains. Can consciousness reside elsewhere? Well, yes, probably can, certainly can. We know about non-locality. We know about things like remote viewing. Somehow consciousness can go beyond the body. Can it reside in a chip? Can it reside in pure energy? Well, these are questions that science will increasingly study, but there are definite initiatives to create a kind of non-biological human-like consciousness. I think we can just leave that there. Lots of technologies are continuing to drive this revolution. You can take a screenshot here. I'm not going to discuss all of these things here, but you can see it is a powerful technological transformation of the technologies on the left that then lead to some of the social developments that you see on the right. So greater AI and quantum computing and nanotech and robotics and all that will lead to implants in the body and brain, which of course will be a very attractive option for people who, don't want to do anything and they want everything just sent to their body and brain. Of course, it allows the central authorities to know everything you're thinking and doing. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. You lose your privacy for the rest of all time. It allows population profiling, including predictive modeling. That is like the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, if you remember that, based on all of your collected digital data, which will allow an AI or a group to probably know you in many ways better than you know yourself, your habits, they will be able to predict you. Facial and voice recognition, nowhere to run and hide. Can't escape the system. Comprehensive surveillance, mind reading tech, that's coming. Virtual telepathy, that's coming probably, and on and on. That's the revolution. It's very bizarre. This is a highly profitable venture. It's another reason why it won't stop. Multinationals are just seeing dollar signs or whatever the new currency will be. They are seeing it. They want it. That goes for universities, which they want the money too. Governments want the money. Research institutions. And then the big tech, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all the other big companies are heavily invested, of course, in AI and everything related to it. Nothing can stop this. 30 years ago, there was a scientist, tech entrepreneur named Bill Joy, one of the co-founders of the company Sun Microsystems. And in the early 90s, Bill Joy was putting out the alarm on the dangers and threats of AI. He said, look, we've got to really do something about this. This is going to be a problem in the early 90s. And people were like, well, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. But what are you smoking there, dude? There's nothing that can stop this train. And that, I think, is true because what we see are these powerful institutional and for-profit and for-power sources that see this is power, this is money, we are going to go there. And it was only a matter of time. And here we are today. And, Bill Joy's plea from 30 plus years ago, of course, went unheeded. And as will be anyone else, whether it's Elon Musk or anyone else who offers a note of caution about this, no one can stop this, can't be stopped. This revolution is underway. Humanity is being shaped, this is very important, to conform with a new way to live. We serve the system in which we find ourselves to live. In other words, if we were living 50,000 years ago in nature, we'd have to serve that system. You got to play by the rules. And if the natural world is throwing wild animals and dangerous predators at you, you better figure out a way to protect yourself or you'll die. You have to create a society that functions effectively to allow you to live. Well, we've modified our environment to such an extent, we have now created new rules. That environment has certain demands of digital rationalization and international legal control, and international commerce has its own demands, and we must conform to those rules. And those systems are guided by the imperative of rationalized efficiency. They must become more efficient, and we have literally no choice as an institutional structure that we live within but to adhere to that. And that is what is driving our transformation. It's a train that is well, is it out of control, or is it going where it was designed to go all along? You can discuss that. But anyway, transhumanism, posthumanism is becoming a fact, and very rapidly. It's changing everything. It's changing how we exist within family structures. We see that it's changing how we form our communities, how we court and mate our loved ones. How you find, whether it's on Tinder as opposed to going out to the bars or as opposed to going out to the social dance of 200 years ago, all of that's changed. How we prepare our food, basic stuff, how we eat our food, dramatically different than it has been for our entire history. We're changing it all. How our kids grow up, how we look at each other, or more to the point, don't look at each other. All of that has changed. Okay, so now let's move away. That's our transformation. We're becoming something different than what we have been for thousands and thousands, and indeed, you could even say millions of years in certain ways. Now, who are we dealing with? There's an image of a gray alien. What is this all about? Well, this was a study that was done a few years ago by the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, known as FREE. A few years ago, they did a study called Beyond UFOs. There's a lot that I disagree with in this study, but there's some valuable information in here as well. And one of the things that this group did is a kind of online questionnaire in which you would answer questions about your encounters with these other beings. Look, there's always going to be problems with a kind of unmonitored online questionnaire open to everyone, but it's also interesting. And in this, people who had their experiences, about half of them reported human-looking beings. This was to the question, have you been on an alien craft of some sort? And if so, would you answer these questions? And so for people who claimed that they've been on a craft, about half of them reported human-looking beings on that craft. About half of them reported short grays as well. And about a third reported tall grays. You can see there's a lot of overlap, and that's probably because some of these people saw more than one type on the craft. In fact, that is the case. About a fifth of them reported seeing hybrids of some sort, so part human, part gray, or something like that. About 13% each reported creatures that were insect-like or reptilian-like, and about a third reported other types. What are those other types? Well, I'll get into all of that in a second. The variety, this is a really excellent artistic rendering of some of these different types. You know, we really have to ask, are all of these types real? Are they all real, or are some of these fantasy, some of them not? Some of them look pretty far out. If you just study them, it's hard to know. Or did these really appear the way that people remembered them? Well, I don't know. Certainly, one of the things that we always have to keep in mind when people encounter or have alleged encounters with non-humans is that there does seem to be a definite level of cognitive manipulation, cognitive influence that they can have over us. That includes memory management, I think is absolutely in the mix here. And so you have to really wonder how accurate are all of these memories. And I think we have to assume that there is going to be room for misremembering how some of these beings appeared. Having said that, I don't think there's really any question that, let me share the screen here again, that there's some variety. Whether you've got like the purely human-looking beings, or you've got any variety of gray type entities or other types of sci-fi types of entities. And it really does cause us to wonder, what are we dealing with? I think there's a lot of variety, and some of these descriptions are perhaps not reliable. But is there no level of variety that is the foundation for this? I suspect that there is the definite variety. These are some more images of some of the different types of alien faces that have been described over the years. And you can see these are often variations of a theme. There's a lot that they share. I think a lot of the difference can be accounted for the fact of maybe remembering things a little differently. These are some humanoid types of descriptions here. These are more human hybrid type looking beings here of varying levels of hybridization. These are variations of what we can say straight up gray alien types with the big eyes. But there's a lot of variety in all of them. And then you get the kitchen sink, where you've got anything that doesn't fit with the more properly or more widely reported cases. And you can see that there's a lot. There's someone that looks like a Chewbacca type. You've got a lizard type reptilian. You got a number on the far bottom right there. It looks like out of the episode of Star Trek, the pilot episode from the 1960s, and everything else. So, what does it all mean? Well, before I get into this next theme here, let me just stop and pause there. So again, this variety, when we see all of these types all at once, I don't have the full answer here, but I would suggest that our best strategy is to be cautious, not to take things as a literal absolute, like this is how it has to be, but to recognize that some of these memories are not always perfect, but perhaps they are moving in a certain direction. So I would certainly say, yes, there is a non-human element to most of those encounters that ended up in the reports of these here that I'm talking about. But again, there's cognitive manipulation and there's memory management going on as well. So these are things that we just need to keep in mind. Now, the other question is, and skeptics will often bring this up, why would these beings even look humanoid? What is the necessity? Why would they all be reporting, 2 arms, 2 legs, forward-facing eyes, ears on the side of the head? I mean, that's what humans have. That's not what all other animals or creatures will have. Many of them walk around on 4 legs. Not many walk on 2 legs. Why do they have to look like us? Doesn't that mean something? Yes, maybe, maybe not. What I would say is there is something that evolutionary biologists refer to as convergent evolution. And this is something I think that has to be considered here. So what is convergent evolution? It's simply a situation where different types of species that are unrelated to each other will take on the similar qualities because the environment enables them to do that. Think of something like flight. Insects can fly, birds can fly, some mammals can fly as well. They're not that closely related to each other, and they all developed those capabilities along different evolutionary lines and different paths. That's convergent evolution. And there's lots of examples of that. You could argue that if there is an abundance of life out in the universe, which I think most of us agree is probably the case, I certainly think that, what would it take for a life form to become a dominant species on its planet and then from that point to be able to move out into space? If we're talking extraterrestrial, let's just keep that for the moment. Well, that's a really good question to ask. Could four-legged creatures do it? Well, they didn't do it here on Earth. Could they do it? Well, if that's the case, you would lack graspable hands. That might be a real limitation. The fact that we are able to stand up, we walk on two legs, turns out that's a real energy saver. Ooh, who knew? It does. It allows you to see a little higher up. That's an advantage. Who knew? And it gives you eventually over time the development of arms and hands, which are very, very interesting and useful indeed. Maybe that's the game changer. I think it probably was. And so you could make a suggestion, and I don't know that this is true, but you could suggest that given enough opportunity and rolls of the genetic dice and enough rolls of evolutionary opportunity, that a life form on another world could develop as well, a bipedal functionality with arms and grasping hands. And maybe once that happens, perhaps they might be off to the races, to world domination, and then eventually development of greater and greater levels of intelligence, because that may become evolutionarily selected. And then they are off into the interstellar universe, looking a little bit like us. Legs, arms, hands, head, eyes. You could argue it's a very efficient body plan, and maybe one that might be well designed for planetary domination. I'm just putting that out there. It's a possibility. I think it's probably true. Now, would that convergent evolution isn't the same as having them look exactly like us, which in some cases they do. Let me get to that a little later. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, perhaps that explains a little bit of it. You got the same chemicals and compounds that exist throughout the galaxy. Our body plan is a good one for a successful species and very likely could appear elsewhere. So there you go. Now let's talk about the human-like beings, because this is something that for many years in my own research, I was very uncomfortable. I'll just be quite honest with you. I was uncomfortable with the idea of human-like beings being reported in these many UFO encounters. I had to come around. It took a long time. I didn't want to believe it because it didn't seem right to me. It seemed as though aliens should look like aliens. They shouldn't look like you and me. Why would they look like us? Why would you have a human-looking species evolve on another planet and then come here? I don't believe that. And I still have a very hard time with that. But there are so many reports of human-looking entities that are associated with these UFOs. At a certain point, I had to throw in the towel and say, you know what? Instead of arguing why I don't like this idea, how about I look at it a different way and ask myself, how could this be true? If you have the data, what might explain that data? And really looking back on it, I think that's a much more logical, and I would say even a more scientific approach to the matter. How could this be true? You've got to follow the data, right? And so by that, that's what we're doing here. Human-looking beings that have been seen in connection with these craft look like us. I think we probably should assume they essentially have our genetics, but they are different from us. I've had a number of good conversations with individuals who've had their own encounters with human-looking entities who just don't seem like us, very telepathic, things like this, and as have other researchers throughout the history of this. So they have different capabilities than us. They have different science than we do. I think, have a different culture in many ways than we do. They have been able to, in my view, insert themselves into our society and pass as us. Yes, I know that sounds like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Not quite, They're not taking over your, they're not killing you and taking over your personality, I don't think. But they are, I think there have been too many accounts of these very human-looking beings speaking to people in our society and discussing their agenda. You can say, well, I don't believe that they're alien, and maybe that's true. But I think that there's quite a bit of this out there. And on top of that, there have been a number of, I think, very legitimate and sincere and honest accounts of people who've been on these craft who, again, have said there were human-looking beings aboard, and sometimes there were human-looking beings working with non-human beings. So I think for me, at a certain point, I just have to take that for what it is. If you really go into the literature and the research on this, it does look like they have individuals who are working a kind of deep undercover operation in some way or another. So they're here. Now, the interactions that people have reported with these beings have generally been positive for the most part. They haven't really come across as evil. They haven't come across as malevolent in any way that I think can be seen as a pattern. They have been seen more or less as aloof. I think that's actually understandable as well. Even if they have our best interests in mind, you could see why they might be aloof, thinking, look, I don't want to get too much involved with these people. They need to develop on their own. They got to figure out their own problems and so forth. Now you've got the grays. I will argue that grays have only been described and depicted recently in our history. There are really no, I mean, there are reports of little people. There are reports of short little, like leprechauns and other types of the fairy folk of the medieval times. Yep, that's all true. That's been described. But none of them were really described as grays with the big eyes and the big brain and all of that. I'm not aware of any of them. And so I think this is a recent development. And this goes along with also with the medical nature of the examinations that they engage in. Yes, people have said they've been taken by the fairies going back hundreds of years, given food. It's a very big theme there. But that's a very different kind of a story than what you get with the grays. These grays, both short and tall, have been associated with abductions, with landing cases, and also with crash retrievals, I would say, yes. The abductions that people have reported seems to be a new program relatively in the last few generations. And it does look like that has been an efficient process for them. Why? Well, what it looks like, if you go through the research, you go through the testimony of abductees, many of them will say, and it doesn't even matter if they report this as a positive or a negative thing, that it involves the creation of human-looking hybrids. And we get that across the board. You get that from the researchers who look at this phenomenon in maybe the most benevolent way possible. People like Barbara Lamb, someone who I'm very, very fond of and close to and really appreciate her work. Or on the other end of the spectrum, people like Dr. David Jacobs and the late Bud Hopkins, researchers also that I have great personal respect and admiration for. They all seem to agree on this, that there is a hybridization process underway. I say that this is a genuine potential threat. I'm not saying it's a definite threat that I know. But again, if you are looking to be cautious, if you're, you want to get to the bottom of this, here's why it's a potential threat. Because we don't have a full explanation of what's going on. It's all going on covertly. None of this is above board. None of this is something that we're having any kind of public discussion on, and not simply from our government, but from these entities. They are doing what they do, and they do not appear to want our participation or our input on the matter. They're just doing what they do. And people can say and have said, well, it's for our own good. They're doing something that's best for us because we don't know any better. Well, I'm going to beg to differ, and I will just say as a personal matter, if a gray alien wants to take me, they damn well better have my permission to do so, or I'm not going to be happy. And I will have some complaints to issue to senior management about that. So I think, if they're going to be doing something that's not where I haven't given my permission, I am going to look at that as a potential threat, especially if you've got a covert operation by which it looks like they're creating human-looking hybrids to insert themselves into our society. That is subversive. You could say it's subversive for good reasons, but it is still nonetheless subversive. Going along with the question of infiltration, this is an image of the very great remote viewer, Pat Price. I mentioned Pat Price the other day in one of these lectures, and Pat Price was, or I think I did, I can't remember. He was an extraordinary remote viewer, one of the best ever. Back in the 1970s, actually walked into the office of Stanford Research Institute and just cavalierly said, "Oh, by the way, in my spare time, I've been remote viewing locations of alien bases. Thought you'd like to know." When anyone walks into your room and says that, you might take it one way. But when Pat Price walks in and says it, you want to take that man seriously. He had extraordinary skills. And what he stated was that there were bases that he detected in Alaska's Mount Hayes. It's an Alaskan mountain chain up there, which he said, incidentally, was being protected by the United States government. That was an alien base. He said there is one in the Pyrenees on the eastern side of that. Between France and Spain, closer to the Mediterranean. There's one in, I believe, Zimbabwe, and in a mountain there, and also one in the center of Australia, which he described as a kind of melting pot where all the alien groups were meeting, and there were humans there as well. It was a kind of way station, sort of like a non-comical version of, if you remember the movie Men in Black, that kind of thing. But maybe without the humor. But Pat Price said that. In fact, what he stated furthermore was that when he was remote viewing the location in Australia, he said, "I detected that they were detecting me, and I just got the heck out of there real fast." So is it true? Well, we don't know that it's true, but I think it's worth considering. You certainly have claims from a number of people that human-looking ETs, I've got a little typo there, sorry, have infiltrated the human infrastructure. I think you have to consider this. I've spoke with UFO researchers over many years who have had their own data points connecting this. So now here's the real thing. If there has been an infiltration, how do you detect it without them knowing about it? That might be a very difficult thing to do indeed, particularly if those individuals, you assume they have to be very intelligent and very capable, have their own means for counteracting our chess moves. They might be having their own better chess moves to deal with us. Let me move on to the question of collaboration. Has there been a human ET collaboration in any sort? Have we collaborated with aliens? This is the real question. You've had these claims going back for decades. Collaboration with greys, collaboration with reptilian or insect-type beings, and also collaboration with other types that look somewhat human. You think of a statement from someone like the late Bill Uhouse, who was a former Marine and contractor who talked about, creating a craft with the help of an alien being named J-Rod. He talked a lot about this in his facility. Or the claims of someone like Dan Sherman, who in his book Above Black talked about communication with this alien group and coordination of human and ET actions in some way or another. The claims of, I'm drawing a blank, but the tall whites scenario out in the desert. I'm sorry, my wife is Charles Hall. Thank you, Tracy. She's off camera, but she helped me out there. Yeah, who wrote his a series of books, which many of us have read, that deal with beings that are very similar looking to us. And are these true? You read them, and some of them can seem quite compelling. We haven't gotten proof of it. But has there been collaboration? We've got the story of Dwight Eisenhower, 1954, having a meeting with extraterrestrials. This is a big question mark, but it is something that if you or any of us were responsible for the defense of the human race, if that was your job, you might have to consider the possibility that these might be true, and you'd have to look into that, wouldn't you? I think so. Let me just review the hypothesis of David Jacobs, someone who, not everyone likes what David Jacobs has had to say about the abduction phenomenon. I certainly will grant that. I do find David's analysis to be very important and very interesting. And overall, I think he's done an excellent job at what he's done. If I have a quibble, it might just be that I don't think his scenario is comprehensive. I think there are other types that may not be as malevolent as what he describes. And in fact, I think he might be inclined to agree with that. But by his hypothesis, he believes that the insectolan types are the dominant of these aliens, that they have the strongest telepathy, and when they are seen, they are always seen in control of the situation. It was his hypothesis that they created the Greys through a process of hybridization, and hybridization with human beings, perhaps. I think that's an interesting theory and could be true. And possibly the reptilians. I don't think he ever really figured out what he thinks about the reptilians. But his argument is that there's a kind of planetary takeover scenario and infiltration going on. Or if not an overt planetary takeover, we could say a transition scenario by which our species is somehow transformed. And guess what? Oh, yes, we are being transformed. One of the things that, if you really want to stop and think about this, one of those things that makes you stop and go, remember that? Jacob's abductees frequently talked, this is back in the 80s and 90s, about a future great change, the great change. This is something that they were told by their hybrid handlers. There's going to be a great change in your civilization. Now, Jacobs interpreted that as a kind of swift alien planetary takeover, but there might be another way to look at this. It could very well be that they themselves have foreseen the great change that we are now going through. And this is the change that I would argue to the fourth stage of humanity, a transhumanist stage, in which we are. I mean, if this is not a great change that we're going through, then I don't know what would be a great change. And it's one that they might have a stake in one way or the other. They might support it, they might not support it, but they, I think, are well aware of it. We talk about some of these other beings. There's a very wide range of them. I don't know how to decide personally what I think about every claim of every type of being. By the way, this image here that you're being shown, I have been made to understand through some other researchers that that's actually potentially a very accurate sketch. That's why I included it there. I do think there's a strong likelihood that because of our development, because of what we are doing now, that any other group that has the ability to observe us is coming here now. They are coming here now because this is our transformation, and we are about, as I like to often say, we are about to leap into their world. They haven't decided to make a grand entrance. They haven't decided to do an Independence Day or land on the White House lawn. Why? Well, you know, there's a couple of different reasons for this. There might be a struggle that's taking place behind the scenes right now among themselves. There may be several types of infiltration of the human population that are taking place right now. We talk about abductions. Are all abductions designed for the creation of hybrid species? I don't think so. Some of them might be more akin to checkups that are happening as a long-term longitudinal study of the human population. I mean, look, we're putting all kinds of carcinogens and toxins into our system. It's not difficult to foresee that they would be interested in seeing how we are transforming ourselves during this particular period of time. To me, that seems like a very logical thing, one thing that they would want to do. I talk about hybrids here. That's David Jacobs' term for the human-looking hybrids. And what I mean by this is when we talk about human-looking non-humans, human-looking aliens, how do we describe these? There is a long-standing series of claims that people in the past have occasionally had with interacting with human-looking beings who don't seem human. I wrote about some of these in my book, The Alien Agendas. There was a friend of Leonardo da Vinci, Fazio Cardano, he was a very brilliant man, and he spoke to his son, and he said, look, I had a conversation. These 5 men came in. They were just not normal. And they said they lived for hundreds of years. They told me all kinds of things. Cardano was a serious man and a brilliant man and one of the top medical and legal minds of his time. And this is what he said to his son, who was also close to a genius, and wrote about it. These individuals he spoke with were human looking. I believe that story. I think the Cardano story is a true one. And there are some other ones as well that we have in our past. But I think that those humans may be qualitatively different from the hybrids that David Jacobs is talking about, these more recent versions of human looking beings. Don't know for sure, but that's what it seems like to me. If you look at it from an alien perspective, looking at the transformation of the human race now here on planet Earth, you could imagine that the stakes might be high. It would be influence over this new infrastructure that this species, us human beings, are creating. It might be a little more valuable than people think. There's this longstanding attitude that I've often heard among people connected to the UFO field who'd say, what could aliens possibly have that's that they would be interested in here for us? We must be like insects compared to them. How many times do you hear this? It's becoming really tiresome because it's really not true. We are not like insects. We have consciousness. We have rational mind. We have the ability to harness nuclear chain reactions. That's not insect level. That's significant. We have, and we've developed these capabilities in a fairly rapid period of time, a very rapid period of time. That is not trivial. So the stakes are high. Let me continue here. Let's talk about telepathy. Telepathy is a significant part of this scenario. And what it means is that they understand the physics of consciousness. That's what I would say. I'll just look at a couple of my bullet points here. Telepathy, there are a lot of theories about how telepathy might be possible. One is through the propagation of ELF waves, that is extremely low frequency waves, meaning there is a long distance between the crests of each wave. And when you get into a deeply meditative state, that generates ELF waves in the area between 5 hertz and 11 hertz. And I cut off part of my bullet here. Normal waking consciousness, though, has a higher frequency. And so here's something that came out of the study of the book of Philip Corso from 25 years ago. He talked about this alien headband. I don't know if some of you might remember this. And he said it seemed like a kind of a psychic way to, well, I've got a bunch of typos on here, my apologies, but essentially an enhancement of telepathic capabilities that he believed these aliens were using. And that's kind of interesting. So they understand the physics of consciousness. That's something that we want to be interested in as well, I would think. Why would there be secrecy relating to all of this, and from the alien point of view? Who are they going to communicate with? The United States government? Well, maybe they would, because the United States government is very powerful. And it's certainly, when you come to Earth, you might quickly realize, yep, this government is one that I have to deal with. But how do you do it? Are you able to? Is your communication method so far beyond that which we have that it's really a major hassle, and is it even worth it? You could imagine that their best solution is you work with the strongest kids on the block, that is the US, maybe the Russians, maybe the Chinese now, and you ensure that you have access to the things that you want or need. I suspect that is the case. And what do they want? What would aliens coming here want? Why would they be here? Are they here solely for our benefit because they love us? Or are they here for reasons of their own? Well, this is something that we're going to be debating and discussing for a long time, but I don't think it's a bad idea to at least hypothesize that they may have motivations that might be motivations we can understand. If they are a life form, if they are biological, if they eat food, if they reproduce, we might imagine that they might have some of similar motivations. They might look at our infrastructure and think, these humans actually have developed a pretty nice, useful infrastructure, or they're developing it now. And if we can genetically engineer our own human-like bodies for ourselves. Hey, maybe we can be eating caviar on the French Riviera for, a lifetime of 500 years or more, with a kind of a nice little gig going on here. That's an entirely possible scenario from my perspective. Some of them you could imagine might want humanity to be out of the way. I mean, after all, we are arguably making a huge mess of things. And they might think we could do it better. We could run your world better than you do. So get out of the way. Is that a possibility? Well, maybe it is a possibility. From quite likely, they would be concerned about our nuclear capabilities. It's not surprising. A little known fact, but probably one that many listeners here do know, is that from 1945 to the end of the 20th century, there were more than, brace yourself, 2,000 detonations of nuclear weapons on this planet, over 2,000. It's absolutely extraordinary. We all know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but there were an unbelievable number of detonations that succeeded that for tests. And these are weapons that are just unbelievable, extraordinary power and capability, particularly some of the detonations of the late 1950s, early 60s were just out of control by the Soviets and by the Americans, both. These are just massive. And, I have spoken with witnesses who were involved in nuclear tests during that period of time, one in particular, who said to me that during those tests, this is in 1961, 62, UFO craft were typically seen in the vicinity during these detonations and then would get out of the way as soon as the detonation happened. And I think they are certainly interested in that. And then, of course, when you just look at all the cases of UFOs that were seen over nuclear weapons facilities and also nuclear scientific facilities, clearly they would be concerned. And, we can assume that there would be species that would come here that would want to help, that might think there is real potential here for this human species. Is there something that we can do to guide them so that they don't make a total mess of things before they get to the level that they need to get to? You can imagine that. This is a message that came to a man named Sir Peter Horsley almost, let's say how many years ago, 70 plus years ago, almost 70 years ago, 1954. I think I talked about Horsley yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll just state again, he was a good friend of Prince Philip, who, of course, as many of us know, was deeply engaged in the UFO subject for many, many years. And on behalf of Prince Philip, Horsley was directed to a meeting with a mysterious man in 1954 at a London flat who was only known as Mr. Janus. Horsley was really kind of blown away by this meeting. And it has to be said, Peter Horsley was a highly skilled, capable man, a very smart man with a lot of capability, a lot of accomplishments in his own right. He sits down with this Mr. Janus and is intimidated and kind of blown away and becomes convinced, by the way, that Mr. Janus can read his mind. Horsley wrote about this in a book toward the end of his life, Voices from a Room, or something from a Room. You can look into it. And this is what Janus said to him. Man in his journeys through the universe may find immeasurable centers of culture far more ancient than his own. So Horsley's looking ahead to, human being going into space and all that. He will discover a wealth of experiences infinitely more startling and beautiful than life can be imagined, even other universes with, get this, with different space and time formula. He's talking about this in the 1950s. Space and time manipulation, all of that. Very interesting. Man invading space for material gain or personal glorification alone will gain nothing. So you get a very spiritual, philosophical message from this individual, which is very typical that people have been saying that they've gotten for many, many, many years. Often you get an anti-nuclear message. You often get an environmental message. You get the message of a coming transformation, the great change, like I was just talking about. All in all, they don't quite see us as equals. Maybe they shouldn't, but the fact is they don't seem to, and that's just something to keep in mind. As I have pointed out as well, they are very active here. large numbers of sightings. They are here in large numbers now. And, you know, one of the things that got me involved in this subject 30 years ago now, 30 plus years ago, were the military encounters. I always found the military encounters with these craft to be of significance because to me, it was a matter of documentation. It always seemed like, look, you have the government that's saying, well, we don't get involved with this. We don't really care about these UFOs. And yet there's declassified document one after the next that says exactly the opposite, that we actually have scrambled many, many jets and Air Force fighters to investigate and deal with these unknown objects. And not just the United States, of course, but all nations. And so I became interested in the military encounters primarily for that reason. But when you study these military encounters, you have to ask, are these signs of hostility or not? And it's not really clear that this is an active kind of war going on or a hostile series of actions. Now, if you're the U.S. military, you could interpret it that because any unknown craft that comes into your sensitive airspace has to be treated as such. But it's not clear how hostile these confrontations are. But one thing that is clear is that these craft, these beings, they do what they want. They're used to getting their own way. And they do seem to operate beyond what we are often able to understand. I try to analyze every UFO report that I read, and I've read thousands of them. I'm always in the habit of asking myself, what's actually going on here? Why is the craft here? What's the craft doing? And sometimes I can figure that out, and sometimes I really cannot figure it out. It's not always easy to understand what is the goal here that these beings are engaged in. And there's a couple of other things to just think about relating to these beings that takes them to another level altogether. I'm a big fan of the work of David Paulides, who writes the many 411 books, which I just want to tell you, if you want to be able to sleep at night, don't read that book as the last thing because they can be creepy as anything, but they are absolutely fascinating. I think David's research is just top notch. It's fascinating. And some of the missing cases that he gets into, I would say, are very suggestive of a higher intelligence and, frankly, a malicious one. Those are some very, very disturbing cases of disappearances. And you really have to ask yourself, who is behind that? And I think it's valid for us to consider many of those cases in the context of what we're discussing here in terms of ET. Why? Because you're dealing with a very high order of intelligence that doesn't have an explanation. Who are these guys? Who are they? And why are they? I mean, some of the results of these missing people have been grisly in the extreme and very, very difficult to explain in conventional terms. And so we have to wonder, who is this? Is this like the movie Predator? You know, is that what they're doing? Do they just come in here for kicks and do what they want? Or is there something else? That may be another aspect of this phenomenon. You talk about animal mutilations as well, many of which, and I will say this as strongly as I am able to, are not conventionally explainable. Some might be. I've looked into this as much as I'm able to. I think some could be, you could say, a black budget covert op type of a thing, but I don't believe that most of these are, and not simply in the United States. I studied in some detail. There was a great wave of animal mutilations that took place in Argentina a little over 20 years ago. Some of them are just utterly baffling, and I don't see conventional explanations there either. Ditto the ones in North America. Very difficult to explain. And so if that is done by an ET or an alien intelligence, I do have to wonder, because some of those seem potentially malicious as well. Certainly malicious to the cattle or the animals involved. There was a couple of other things here to keep in mind. Back in the early 80s, there was a scientist out of the University of Missouri named Harley Rutledge, who did a very, very interesting study of UFOs. He came into this as a result of a wave of sightings that took place in that state, and he was a skeptic of UFOs at the time, and he thought, let me get some of my grad students together here, and we're going to do a study of this. We're going to really look into this, do some serious observation, recording of data, the way science demands. And he did. In fact, he wrote a book about it called Project Identification. It's a very good book. One of the things that Rutledge found, to his dismay, to his great disturbing truth was that this phenomenon, it was real. He became absolutely convinced it was real, and was kind of almost messing with him, messing with us, showing precognitive capabilities, for one thing, and showing an ability to operate on a completely higher, different, more sophisticated level than we, or he, we should say, and his team had the ability to deal with. I would encourage you to look into his research. It's quite interesting. Really what you come down to is that they know our moves before we do. It's like playing chess against Bobby Fischer or Gary Kasparov or Deep Blue. They know what you're going to do before you do it, and they've got all of the counter moves ready before you even make it. Some of these intelligences, what are they? We hear about the trickster intelligence. We hear about dimensional entities. What is going on? We don't have all of the answers, but they may be part of an advanced ET intelligence. It's entirely possible, or they may be beyond a merely ET intelligence. Some people pretend that they have all the answers here. I talk with them all the time, but do they really have the answer? Well, you'll have to decide. I see I'm getting close to my time limit here, but I still have more to say, so I'm just going to keep going. I am totally convinced that our political and power elites know all about this, or they know all about this to a much greater extent than ordinary people do. There's an image of Jimmy Carter. I've told this story many times now, but I'll just mention it quickly here. I have a connection, a very, very well-established individual, brilliant man, who told me this story directly, and he is in a position to have knowledge of this, and just stated that in the June of 1977, shortly after Carter became president, it was his first year in office, was briefed on the ET matter. And at the end of this briefing, the person telling me did not have proof of the exact content of the briefing, except that it was related to UFOs and ET. And at the end of it, Jimmy Carter, according to this, was seen deeply upset by what was told to him. And you can just take that for what it's worth. There was a statement made by the former Russian president and prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, who's still very, very significant and powerful in Russia, back in 2006 at a Davos meeting. This is a different world, a different era. Russia was invited to all the World Economic Forum meetings and all of that stuff back then. Medvedev is there, and he was interviewed about, well, he's talked about aliens. You can find this interview. It's out there. And I have watched that interview many, many times. And for my part, I don't think that he was being ironic. I don't think that he was being cavalier or silly, despite the fact that the person interviewing him was laughing, literally laughing when he talked about what he said was, when you become president of Russia, you are given 2 briefcases with high-level top secret information. One deals with all the information on nuclear codes and nuclear secrets and so forth. And the other, he said, deals with all the information on aliens in the country. And clearly the implication is not illegal aliens in the country. That's not going to warrant a top secret briefcase, right? He's talking about aliens in Russia. And you look at his face, you look at the way he's talking about this, he looked quite serious to me. Why would he have said such a thing is really a good question to ask. Why would Dmitry Medvedev have said this? And I don't know. But sometimes, it's a long day, you're tired, maybe you don't give a damn anymore, or maybe it just comes out, and maybe he regretted saying it later. Maybe he was glad that reporter laughed. Things happen, information gets out. I take that as a genuine statement. There were definitely confirmed statements by other important people over many years attesting to the reality of this phenomenon and the cover-up. Great statement by a Spanish general in the 1970s, Carlos Caballero, who said, this is an international thing and there's international control over this. This is all real. Yes, absolutely. My old friend Bob Dean, when he was in the U.S. military, talked about the information he learned in the 1960s. I had a very, very nice meeting personally with a former general of the Portuguese Air Force who was chief of staff, General Tomás. I'm not good at pronunciation of Portuguese names, but General Tomás Conceição e Silva, who spoke to me personally about deep, high-level knowledge of this phenomenon going across NATO. The world leaders, some of them know about this. They know. And there's a connection that they all share about this. There is quite a lot of communication that goes on among them. So again, I have another individual that story that came to me from a source that I absolutely do believe, that says not necessarily that we have open hand contact, but that a handshake has been made. That is the statement that came to me. Certainly something that goes beyond our formal institutions, our recognized legal structures. And you have to assume that that's a necessity from their point of view. This has got to be kept beyond the official infrastructure we have. Lockheed Martin, yes, I talked about them yesterday. Time frames. I'm looking at this time frame that I put in here, and we may have to update this. It could be a lot sooner than we think. But even so, major changes. We're talking through breakthroughs in transhumanism, AI, as well as disclosure and things being out in the open. I put this particular slide together about 2 years ago. Things can change a lot. Is the time frame of dramatic change as distant as 2040 to 2050? Well, that's less than 20 years from now. That could still be correct. As rapid as things are today, obviously the 2020s and the 2030s are going to be a period of very, very substantial change. I can't even begin to think how by 2030 what things are going to look like. So my prediction for a dramatic change could be quite conservative here. Quite conservative. It could be sooner. The last thing I'm going to say here, and I'm just going to ditch the slides and wrap it up because I know what I want to say. I don't consider it an accident that the transformation that we are making to this fourth stage of humanity that I like to talk about, this transhumanist stage, I don't think it's an accident that we're having that at the same time that we're having this disclosure moment. I think that they are connected. I don't see these two massive developments in our society as being completely independent of each other. They're too big, they're too profound, and they must have a relationship. And one of the things that we have to do is figure out what is that relationship. So we need to ask, are aliens causing this? Or are aliens, do they just know about it and they're watching it? Do they support our transformation into this new whatever it is we're becoming? Or do they have reservations about it? I tend to think that they support it. And, we have to ask ourselves, is this something that we even like ourselves? But whether we like it or don't like this transformation, we may have mixed feelings about it. What can be done about it? Can anything be done to stop this transformation of the human species that is going on? It's happening now. Our complete social, sociological, physical infrastructure, all of that is being changed, and it is going to change human beings and human social interactions. Is this something that can be modified in any way? That's really a very difficult question that we're going to need to be asking and continually asking for the next generation and beyond. But also we need to ask, what is the attitude that these other beings have? What I see is this: we are turning ourselves into a global entity that will be under globally centralized control. That I think is happening. For better or for worse. You could say for better and for worse. There's positive things in there you could see. And there's definitely very frightening things in here. Loss of privacy for the rest of all time, that's one thing that might be frightening to many people. And the imposition of very likely higher levels of centralized control, I think is certainly happening as well. From an ET or an alien point of view, we've got to ask ourselves, is this something that they like? Again, I think probably they do. Why? Because they're probably like this as well. They have very likely gone through their own gauntlet of transformation to go into their own version of a fourth stage of whatever they are, which means centralized rational control, maybe by an AI entity of some sort, maybe by, I don't know, some form of higher intelligence. You could say it's spiritual or not. We don't know. I don't know anyway. But I do think that from their point of view, this might be a change that they desire. Makes things a lot easier from their perspective, if nothing else. We are in a very, very profound transformation here. And there's a lot of ways to look at it, pro and con. But the bottom line is we really need to understand that this is what's happening. And in fact, it's promoting a kind of global revolution. This is the last thing I'm going to say here before I bring Jim back. This transformation of necessity is creating a globalist, you could say, revolution that is happening, is being directed by folks over at Davos, folks at the Bilderberg. Yeah, all of that, absolutely. They are behind a lot of this. They support it. Whether or not they are solely responsible for this is another question. And by that, I simply mean it's not simply by design, but is some of this change by default, by the very virtue of the society that we've created for ourselves. Is this their vision of the most rational, efficient way of doing things? You know, we have a long, long history in our society of scientific utopianism where, and many of those visions back in the 60s talked about the creation of a future hive mind among humanity. Scares the hell out of me, might scare the hell out of you, but are we moving toward a hive mind as one aspect of this transformation? Well, these are more questions than I can answer with the time given to me. So I'm just going to thank you. It's been a real pleasure being here with you these last 4 days. And I'd like to bring Jim back. And if we've got time for some questions, which I'm sure we do, I'd be happy to answer them. Hi, Jim.
Richard, you know, I so admire the way you have presented this material. It's Socrates would be very proud of you, that it's far more edifying, he said, to live in the questions, you know, in the spirit of truth pursued rather than the spirit of truth possessed. You know, so often in the face of complexities, we're given simple answers and doctrines to believe in. And I think you've done a great service by provoking deep inquiry about a phenomenon that we know is out there, but is so gossamer and so nuanced that we don't even know what we don't know. And you've really embodied that this week. So I just want to acknowledge the humility of your intellect, because someone who knows as much as you do would probably have a tendency to pontificate just to provide comfort, if nothing else, to those who are inquiring. And you've really served truth, I think, in a very noble way by leaving us with more questions than answers. And I just want to acknowledge that as we wrap this week up. There's a deep intellectual integrity to what you're representing, and I just want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that. I've often been accused of being totally black-pilled. I look at the world and I sometimes do have some pessimism, but I'm not a completely pessimistic person. I must say that. But to me, it does come down to understanding what is true. And it's difficult. I mean, I'm sure many people, you know, who are here with us right now have also been engaged in this subject for a very long time. I've been engaged, you know, full time, essentially, for more than 30 years now. And I'm always amazed by this subject because I have many advantages. I've been able to work full time on this, more or less. I had a good education going into the UFO field to begin with. And I'm tenacious and I really want to get to the bottom of issues. And I've been able to read and understand many things. And you know what? It's still difficult for me. I still struggle with a lot of the information. And I ask myself, well, if it's hard for me, it's probably very hard for people who haven't spent nearly as much time on it as well. And when I find people who are absolutely sure that they know what the truth is, I become very suspicious of those folks, to be honest with you. I become very suspicious.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Well, listen, let me probe two dimensions as we wrap this up. One is, would love to hear your thoughts along the following lines. You know, I think that many of us, you know, informed to some degree by people like Don Beck and Ken Wilber, Abe Maslow, talk about a hierarchy of needs, a hierarchy of spiritual development, that, we start out in a primitive way. You can talk about, egocentricity, ethnic centricity, and then world centricity at the most simple level. But the notion of spiritual development is that as we mature and as we grow, our spiritual refinement also increases, and we become more and more capable of mystical knowing and compassion for the world and the cosmos. That's in some ways the bedrock of human spirituality. The Buddha, even 2,500 years ago, said of the most fortunate of all sentient beings, he said, is the human, because we're the most capacious and therefore the most enabled to attain enlightenment even in a lifetime. And enlightenment in some fundamental way is that capacity to be completely altruistic and compassionate. So when one thinks of these ETs, millions or billions of years more advanced than we are, it seems almost incongruous to think of them as anything other than certainly spiritually aware at a level that we humans probably can't even imagine. And therefore, one would think if you have a cosmic scope of your intelligence and consciousness, one would become more and more loving and more benign. But the evidence that you're presenting is that it may not be so, that these beings are not only capable of crass abductions, but potentially animal mutilations and, in some instances, coercive practices. So I'm just wondering, you as both a historian and an intellectual, how do you square that circle?
I actually am not really a believer in most of the 19th and 20th century mantra of progress. I think the longer I think about it, the more flawed I think that the entire formulation is. And even Maslow and some of the other thinkers you're talking about, and they have a lot to offer. I'm not trying to dismiss them, but I think that they're founded on a assumption that I don't know that I agree with anymore. I'll give an example. We have tremendous technological progress. And if we were to time travel our way back to ancient Greece or beyond, and to tell some of those people about some of the things that we've created, our iPads and our cell phones and our nice clothing and our beautiful teeth and all these other things that they may not have always had, they might think, wow, you guys have really solved all of your problems, haven't you? You probably have peace on earth and goodwill toward mankind. And we would look at each other and say, don't tell them with the truth. This idea that technological progress somehow must go along with spiritual enlightenment, I don't know that I agree with it. Think about all the crimes that we did during the 19th and 20th and 21st century with our very advanced technology, our very advanced infrastructure. Are we any more spiritually enlightened than ancient people? In some ways, we have certain ideologies that are more advanced, I would say, yes, in some ways. But how far do we take them? It's not clear. What's to say that an alien species that's just marginally ahead of us in some ways figured out a way to get here? Do we really know that they are godlike or divine in their orientation? Or are they interstellar economic hitmen, to borrow a phrase from John Perkins, who wrote the story, Confessions of an Economic Hitman? Could they be doing the same thing on an interstellar base? Is there really a reason to say that's impossible? I've listened to arguments from a lot of researchers who've said, well, they're clearly not malicious, because if they were, they would have destroyed us by now. And I think that's really not very persuasive logic to me. There's a lot of reasons why they might not do an Independence Day on us. Earth is incredibly valuable. Do you really want to like engage in a kind of wiping out of all of that and destroying everything else along the way if you consider Earth to be valuable? Maybe you don't. I think there's a lot of scenarios that we just have to keep in mind here that are not all beneficent. And I will never say that it's impossible that there are benevolent beings out there. Talk to too many people who've had what they are convinced are very positive encounters, and I'm not here to say that that's not the case. But I'm also, there's a lot of folks probably listening now who've had some very disturbing encounters indeed. I mean, I know many, and I don't want to, it's not for me to disregard them either. And, it also could be that we are not in a position to really see the grand scheme of things. I've heard researchers defend some of the most horrific, terrifying abduction encounters by saying, look, when an animal's taken to the vet, they don't understand either. Well, okay, great. But you know what? I'd like to understand. And I want to be treated like a house cat. Sorry, but I just don't. So I would like to have some understanding of this. And my only point is we don't know enough to say one way or the other for sure. We need information. That's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. As Jung pointed out, the cosmic dimensions of good and evil pervade all that is, that humanity is not the exception to the cosmos, but
Right.
it's the exemplar of the cosmos. And if we wrestle with this, as he conjectured, agreeing with you, in 10,000 years, he said, human beings will still be wrestling with the same issues within the context in which they find themselves, but the interplay between that light and dark dimension, and therefore the ethical judgments never cease at some technical or otherwise level of advancement. So I really want to acknowledge that. I think that's a very judicious.
I think Jung was maybe the wisest of all the 20th century psychologists. I think he was far ahead of so many other people. And he's always worth.
And finally, talk a little bit more about remote viewing, because this is going to be a major part of our training program. We're going to be teaching the history, facts, law, technology, but also who are these beings and how do we communicate with them, and mental telepathy, remote viewing, clairvoyance of various kinds, even interspecies communication, the learning how to interact and communicate with other species enables one to engage in communication with extraterrestrial beings. So I would just love to hear more about what your view is, given what you know about the ETs. Would you agree with this hypothesis, I guess you would say, that mental telepathy and remote viewing are actually the most effective ways, at least that we know about now, to communicate with who they are?
Yes and no. It's funny, in the after chat yesterday, my wife Tracy came on and was able to contribute to that as well. It was really good. One of the questions that came up there was very similar to what you're asking here. In fact, I was asked it first before Tracy came on, but we really see it the same way. The thing is, yes, so the ETs clearly have telepathic capability. And if I were a highly intelligent ET observing humanity, I would probably be interested in those human beings who exhibit those types of capabilities more than others, just for obvious reasons. And I'm sure that that is partly one of the things that they look at, I would think. But when you talk to a lot of remote viewers, what you find is they do not want to interact with these other beings. They're afraid of them. There's a strong hesitancy. Tracy has that hesitancy herself, but she is one of many, many people that I know who are very qualified remote viewers. I remember a couple of years ago, I spoke with Dr. Travis Taylor, who was over, the Skinwalker Ranch, and we had a big conversation about the so-called hitchhiker effect. You go there, something attaches itself to you, you can't get rid of it. This apparently is something that has happened and is disturbing to those people who have it. And it's a similar thing with these ETs. I spoke years ago with Joe McMoneagle, the legendary remote viewer, who had his own ET remote view experience. Almost the way he described it, it just kind of happened. And he said to me something like, they kicked him out of there. He's on there and they're like, get the hell out. They were not interested in him doing that. Pat Price, famous, I mentioned him earlier. He remote viewed the base, supposedly the base in Australia. And he said, oh no, they're looking at me. Ingo Swann famously had a series of encounters with the mysterious Mr. Axelrod. I talked a lot about that on my website recently. Ingo is remote viewing the far side of the moon. He says to Axelrod, I think they can detect me. And Axelrod says, come away from there very quickly. There's this feeling of, you better be careful if you're going to engage in a direct remote view of these ET beings. Now, is it possible you can learn things? I would say it's absolutely possible, but it's not for me to tell the remote viewer to do that. They have to make that decision themselves.
Yeah. What is it? Fools rush in where angels fear to tread.
Yeah, I mean, and there are cases of people who engage in deep meditation, deep prayer, you could say. What are they communicating with? Is it all aliens, or there are other types of entities as well?
Yeah.
Are there? And so I feel like I've gone to a ball game without the scorecard. Who are the players? Where are they? What are they? Is it all aliens, or is it aliens and are there interdimensional entities? Are they separate? Well, these are questions that we continue to ask, and maybe some are very safe to connect to, and maybe others might be a little more questionable. I don't know.
Yeah, gotcha. Good. Well, thank you, Richard. This has been a splendid program. I look forward to your, go ahead.
Can I throw one more thing in? This
Sure.
is a plug. It's a shameless plug. But Tracy and I are organizing a consciousness event at the end of this month for a full weekend. It's like a weekend retreat. We love what we're doing. We've got Dale Graff and Russell Targ among many other people who will be talking about remote viewing, precognition, consciousness issues. And if anyone is interested, go to our website, richardolanmembers.com. The top banner's got a nice picture of Tracy there. Just click it. It'll give you all the information you need.
Yeah, and we'll have Tracy on in a few days to
She'll be happy to
about it, because we want to support this as much as we can and support all the work that you and Tracy
thank you.
So thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. And then next week, everyone, we're going to have a whole week program on science and consciousness, which is going to be talking about remote viewing and mental telepathy and clairvoyance. And it's going to be hosted by the Ubiquity University School of Science and Consciousness, in part to support the training program that we're developing with New Paradigm Institute on extraterrestrial studies. So Richard's going to be an integral part of that. Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you, everyone. This will bring us to a close. You're all welcome to the after session chat. Richard's going to join for a few minutes, so you have the opportunity to interact a little bit more informally. And we'll see you then tomorrow, or rather on Monday, for the next week of Humanity Rising. Thanks again, Richard.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Jim.
Be well, everyone. Bye for now.